present Richard Wightman, our senior leader, for the past 19 years and for a few more days to come to preach on legacy to us this morning. Let's just honour him again.
Thank you. You can see I'm getting a bit gaga. First of all, I forget I need to get the mic on. Then I forget my notes. Then I forget my Bible. Then I can't find my water. So, anyway, thank you. Yeah, thank you for working alongside me for so many years. So many of you. Yeah, thank you. It has been good to run this race with others. I am into partnership. I am into working with others, and I know one of the keys to that is it's actually about identity. One of the big things that we talk about on the School of Supernatural Life, that it is about having that in the right place. That I'm never looking for it to be about me or how I do things or how I look. I think it's about 5 years since I've led a Sunday morning meeting here, because there are other people who are better at it. So they're better at hearing God in the moment. Give me half an hour and I'll work out where God's taking it, what God's saying. But when you've got a nanosecond to decide we're going this way or that way in the meeting, I'm not good at that at all. And so I appreciate so many people, Dave, Sharon, people who went before me, Tony, John and Sheila, and all the others of you who've worked with me over so many years. So thank you so much. It is a just as they say, it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a church and all the different giftings to raise disciples who again make disciples. So thank you. Let's pray. Father, I do pray that as I talk about legacy this morning, that you'll help me. You'll help me to speak what you want to say, and help us as a church to do what we see the Father doing. Amen. David didn't tell you that the other feature of that trip to Donbass was region of the Ukraine, was that he said, and they have the thing that they really love doing is saunas, and by the way, they're always naked in the sauna. So that was a different experience as well. Yeah, it's men only, but yes, so, yeah, it was, it's good. So I think, yeah. Yeah, I'm going to start with a story. When I first started leading this church, we had a guy in the church who was well established. He then started falling out with everyone. I counted 13 people that he fell out with. There was a lovely couple who was virtually impossible to fall out with. He eventually achieved it with them by having a go at them about their children. They wouldn't take offense, but he managed it eventually. And I was thinking, you are falling out with absolutely everybody. And I'm going, you complete idiot. You are blowing all your friendships in this church. And then at that point, I didn't say you complete idiot. I did manage to keep my mouth shut on that one. But at that point, he then left the church. And it was only afterwards did I find out his background, his history. He'd been abandoned by his parents at the age of 5. He went from one foster home to another, and each time he got to know people well and trusted them, the foster parents handed him back. And then I realized that he expected good friends to reject him. So he got his rejection in first. And in that moment, because I understood the history, I went from thinking, you absolute prat, to real compassion for him. Really, really for him. Yeah. And I realized if you know people's background, it explains so much about their present. Yeah. When I was applying for university to study history, we had to write an essay on Henry Ford's summary of history. History is bunk. Discuss. Yeah. And that statement's such rubbish because it explains why you are where you are. It shows what's worked and what hasn't. Yeah, you often have to adapt for the next season and so on, but it does give you a good starting point for understanding. And this morning we're going to look at the book, the whole book of Deuteronomy. We're also going to take a look back over 30 years. I'm going to talk a bit about how you build a legacy, and we're going to use some examples from this church. And I'm going to offer you some principles for building a legacy in your life. And in essence, it's about looking back in order to plan forward. And Deuteronomy, the whole book of it, is Moses' review of the 40 years that he'd been leading the Israelites in the desert. So let's read Deuteronomy chapter 1 and verses 1 to 8. So these are the words Moses spoke to all Israel in the desert east of the Jordan, that is in the Arabah, opposite Suf, between Paran and Tophel, Laban, Hazeroth, and Dizahab. It takes 11 days to go from Horeb to Kadesh Barnea by the Mount Seir road. In the 40th year, on the first day of the 11th month, Moses proclaimed to the Israelites all that the Lord had commanded him concerning them. And this was after he defeated Sihon, king of the Amorites, who reigned in Heshbon, and Edrei had defeated Og, king of Bashan, who reigned in Ashtaroth. East of the Jordan, in the territory of Moab, Moses began to expound this law, saying, "The Lord our God said to us at Horeb, 'You've stayed long enough at this mountain. Break camp and advance into the hill country of the Amorites. Go to all the neighboring peoples in the Arabah, in the mountains, in the western foothills, in the Negev and along the coast, to the land of the Canaanites and to Lebanon, as far as the great river, the Euphrates. See, I've given you this land. Go in and take possession of the land that the Lord swore he'd give to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and to their descendants after them.'" It starts, and this whole book is Moses' recap. It starts with the goal. Verse 8, "Go in and take possession of the land the Lord swore he gave to your fathers." And that's my first principle for working on leaving a good legacy. Know your goal and make sure that that goal is really worthwhile. If you don't have a target, you can't possibly hit it. Make it about people, not things. Yeah, in fact, one of my mantras has always been people ahead of ministry. So the story that Tim told you about trying to do my best for Tim, not the best for the ministry of, we need a worship leader and soon, please, God. Yeah. And my target for myself is for Jesus to say to me, "Well done, good and faithful servant." But it's always couched in equipping and leading people. You can't take it with you, so there's little point in accumulating possessions and wealth except to use them well. But what you can do is the legacy through people. So what's the target of your life? Just to survive? You're going to die anyway. You need a bigger goal, even if you have short seasons of just surviving along the way. What do you want your legacy to be? Think big, think bigger than yourself. Think of things that cannot be achieved without divine intervention. Things that go beyond what you can yourself do. So I'm going to give you a summary of the whole book of Deuteronomy, chapter by chapter. But it will be fairly fast. Chapter 1, he appoints leaders. He sends out spies. The Israelites rebel. Chapter 2. 40 years of wandering in the desert, he recaps that, and the defeat of the king of Heshbon. Chapter 3, defeat of the king of Bashan, and division of the land east of the Jordan. And Moses himself being banned from going into the promised land after the disobedience of the Israelites. So that takes me to chapter 3, verses 26 to 28. "But because of you, the Lord was angry with me and wouldn't listen to me. That's enough, the Lord said. Don't speak to me any more about this matter. Go up to the top of Pisgah and look west and north and south and east. Look at the land with your own eyes, since you're not going to cross this Jordan. But commission Joshua and encourage and strengthen him, for he'll lead this people across and would cause them to inherit the land that you will see. Chapter 4, obedience commanded and idolatry forbidden. Chapters 5 to 10, reiteration of the 10 Commandments and following God. Chapter 11, the law summarized in 3 words: love and obey. Moses reminds the people of the goodness and action of God. That God has been leading them, and although they've had tough times through those wanderings in the desert, he is leading them, and it is always pointed back to what God has done. And that's my second point. Deuteronomy chapter 11, he says from verse 4, he says, you saw and experienced the discipline of the Lord your God, his majesty, his mighty hand, his outstretched arm, the signs he performed, and the things he did in the heart of Egypt, both to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and to his whole country. What he did to the Egyptian army, to its horses and chariots, how he overwhelmed them with the waters of the Red Sea as they were pursuing you, and how the Lord brought ruin on them. Moses reminds the people of the goodness of God, and he uses the stories of the past to build a legacy. Stories are powerful. Stories of decision and faith and courage and service. This church has actually been pretty good at modelling that, about modelling, repeating the stories of the goodness of God. But apply them, that principle, to your own life. What are the stories that you can keep retelling that build people up, build faith, and build towards your desired legacy? My children tease me because they have heard some of the stories so often and so repeatedly that they're going, yeah, we've heard that one before. But the thing is, they're repeated sufficiently often that they don't forget them. Yeah? Do you want to come and tell the story, either of you two? Steph? No. They're like me. I want to sit quietly in the back. And Deuteronomy 11 says, teach them to your children, talking about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road. Moses tells the Israelites to teach their children. My children don't have my experience of God healing me so much from asthma. But I keep retelling that story so that they don't forget, right? So that their understanding is influenced by what God has done with me. So that's principle 3. Teach those you influence actively. We all influence others, whether your children, your spirit children, your work colleagues, your friends. There are all people whose lives we influence by what they watch and see in us. Don't just leave it all to seep into them as if by accident. You're actually up against a whirlwind of outside influence in social media and things like that. And you have to be very active, very intentional, and start as early as you can. Okay? We're now getting into, our 2-year-old grandson, and we are well into telling him Bible stories now. Because you want to influence as thoroughly as possible. And the thing is, the first thing you hear has the most impact, because it becomes the basic building block from which other things, if something else comes in later, it has to challenge and overcome that first one. So the starting point really, really matters. Deuteronomy chapters 12 to 28, laws for living in the promised land once they've occupied it. Chapter 29, an offer of a choice to renew the covenant between God and Israelites. And chapter 30 is the choice, with God or against him. As it says in Deuteronomy 30, see, I'm getting through it quite fast, 15 to 18. See, I set before you today life and prosperity, death and destruction. For I command you today to love the Lord your God, to walk in obedience to him and to keep his commands, decrees, and laws. And then you will live and increase, and the Lord your God will bless you in the land you're entering to possess. But if your heart turns away and you're not obedient, if you're drawn away to bow down to other gods and worship them, I declare to you this day that you will certainly be destroyed. You will not live long in the land you're crossing the Jordan to enter and possess. So we're given a choice. Are we going to follow? When we've heard the stories, what are we going to do about them? Okay. And chapters 31, Joshua is to succeed Moses, and rebellion is predicted. Chapter 32, that summarizes the book again in song. Chapter 33, Moses blesses the people. And chapter 34, Moses climbs Mount Nebo, looks out over the promised land, and dies. I hope I won't have to do the dying bit, at least yet. So there you have Deuteronomy, the whole book, in 3 principles. Know your goal and make it worthwhile. 2, use stories to build towards your legacy. And 3, teach those you influence actively. So let's apply that to the church over the last 40 years. So 1970s saw the church planted in Newport Pagnell in an old mission hall. 1980s, it bought a building in New Bradwell and grew. In 1990s, Bill and I arrived. We refurbished that building and grew to about 120 people at that point. 2003, Tony, who's here today, thank you for coming back for this. Thank you. Planted another church, and I moved from sort of being a volunteer elder to leading full time. And then my summary of the last 19 years would be the first couple of years was really about developing momentum and establishing values. So things like kingdom ahead of church, right, the priority for advancing the kingdom, and Jesus will build his church. Rather than us focusing on trying to grow the church, we focus on advancing the kingdom wherever it takes people. Okay? I remember going to speak at the Vineyard Church in town a few years back, and there was a couple there who had visited here, and I went to see them afterwards, and she was English, he was from South Africa. He came from quite a formal background. She came from an Anglican background, and they were trying to work out sort of what church to go to together. And I said, yeah, you're right. You need to find something together. But on the spectrum that you're on, we're just plain not on that spectrum at any point of it. I don't think we're the right place for you. And I pointed them to 2 or 3 other churches, and they ended up settling at Vineyard. And then I turn up about 5 years later, and this couple jump up and say, that's the guy who told us not to join him. Yeah. And it's because we're after the best for people, right? People ahead of ministry and advancing the kingdom, not the particular local church. Yeah. So we established some of those values. And then 2005 to 7, we were running out of space. We were looking for a larger building. We met at Stantonbury Leisure Centre 3 weeks in 4. And when we couldn't, the youth would go down the local middle school, the adults would be in the main hall, and the children would fill all of the upstairs in the building, including one children's group meeting in a cupboard. It was a large cupboard, but it was a cupboard. Yeah. We called those Sundays Sardine Sundays. Yeah. In fact, there was a guy who turned up, worked out that I was leading the church. I was sitting in the back row as usual, and he sidled up to me on a spring morning with it was literally standing room only, and just said, "It's a bit smelly in here, isn't it?" I'm going, "Yeah, it is. We could do it somewhere a bit bigger." So 2007 to 9, we bought this building and started the initial fit out. Dave did a massive amount of work on that. We shifted from 130% seat occupation, so full and standing, yeah, to 23%, right, a small number of people in a vast hall, which was 40% bigger because we hadn't built the smaller halls over there, and this was just a vast, bare, concrete, really rather not very attractive place to be. painful and unattractive to be here at first. Yeah, bare, stark. 2009 to 11, actually the big thing was actually getting to grips with identity in Christ. And when I first heard John Arnott on this, I thought this was going to be the next thing we talked about. Almost the sort of the next, the next thing to teach, into. And then we realised, actually, it's a lot more than that. This is absolutely foundational to everything we do. And it took us about 2 years to get our heads around this as leaders before... Sorry, I'm wandering off. Sorry. I think Dan may have assumed I was going to put it on, and I assumed he'd put it on. Sorry about that. So 2009 to 11, this foundation as a child of God. Yeah, you can fiddle with me. Yeah, I've moved it. And the big thing about that was actually it changed the way we talked as a church. So before that, I would rather commonly say, you should do this, you ought to do that, you need to do the other, right? And we shifted to, if you love Jesus, you will choose to, right? But it gave people choice rather than pressure. And then they choose, are they going to step in? Is this for me? Am I going to go there or not? It gives people a lot more space. And so it didn't change the end result of, what are we asking? But it shifted from you should give, you ought to give, you need to give, to if you love Jesus, you will choose to give. Yeah. Next couple of years, we saw a lot of development with the Winter Night Shelter and Community Action. A couple of years after that, 2013 to 15, we built that wall and developed those 3 halls. 2015 onwards, we were introducing a senior leadership team and getting to grips with that. I have large capacity, but I realised that I was running out of capacity. And when I looked at it, I realised I got 38 people who reported to me, either in this church or in other charities that I was dealing with, and I just couldn't cope any longer. So we changed it all. Right? We introduced a wider team, and senior leadership team started working with Sharon and Tim and Dave, and then eventually Donna and Johan on that. So just changing the way we did things. Then we were establishing a multi-site. Then pandemic hit, and we're talking more and more about disciples who make disciples. So that I think of the Sunday meetings as secondary these days. The prime thing is our relationship with Jesus, and then how we are his missionaries out there one by one, every last one of us. And then the Sundays are a place where we gather to worship and we gather to support, but it's secondary, right? And I know that that's something that Tim is continuing. And then the last 12 months, we've actually spent a lot of time thinking about handover, okay, and doing that well. And they are points, it's like passing a baton. They are points at which there is risk. There's more risk of dropping the baton, making a mistake, getting it wrong. And one final further lesson, and the reason why I've told you that little sort of summary of my last 20 years, is reinvent yourself regularly to stay fresh. So Moses had 40 years as a prince in Egypt, as an adopted son of Pharaoh. He had 40 years as an outlaw murderer and shepherd on his own. And he had 40 years leading the people of God towards the promised land. Me, every 2 or 3 years, there's a new direction or a new initiative. Try and listen to what God's saying and then step into a new thing. It protects against boredom and stillness. So over the last few years, I think we've grown from probably about 150 people to, well, pre-pandemic, I think it was a little over 900, but, who knows right now, post-pandemic, it's still a bit uncertain. We planted 4 churches. So there's Grace Church, there's West Church, there's Toaster, and also in Kinshasa. We've seen 50 to 100 professions of faith each year. We've baptized 20 to 30 people each year for at least the last 15 years. The number of marriages that we've held has gone up about fourfold. Used to be a marriage every other year. Now it's a couple a year. And we've worked at equipping others to make disciples who make disciples. And we built a much larger base of leaders in their 20s and 30s. We sold a building and bought another one, about 6 times the size. We've actually spent about £1.5 million just developing this building, which I'm a little wary of, because if it is simply the secondary means of support, I don't want to put too much of the time and effort into that. So that leaves, priorities: know your goal, principles, make it worthwhile, use stories to build towards legacy, teach those you influence actively, and reinvent yourself to stay fresh. Actually, I'm also reinventing myself again now. More time with the grandchildren and travelling. More time working with more churches overseas. More time with the global family, developing leaders and some troubleshooting. More time discipling others to disciple others. And I ain't finished yet. And I ask the same of you, every last one of you, as a child of God who knows their identity as a loved child of the living God. And I ask that of you to play your part in doing what God calls you to. I'm very happy with the legacy so far. Good, strong, stable team. Excellent leader in Tim with good judgment. He's got far more ability than me to lead people into the presence of God. A large number of developing leaders, and well positioned for significant kingdom expansion. I think that will be both the scale of this church and people being sent elsewhere. I'm at the end of this phase of leading. Others are at the start of their next phase. I want the next generation to be able to build on the shoulders of the previous. And I know it will be about multiplying ministry. You are all ministers of that gospel. You all make disciples who make disciples. Moses did that. The lawgiver who pulled them together and out of slavery. But it took Joshua and the next generation to take them on into the promised land. I know God has got great things for you individually, one by one, and great things for this church together.